Welcome back. New claims tonight about how much even low-level government employees and contractors can find out about you with just a few computer keystrokes. They're the latest revelations from NSA leaker Edward Snowden, and whether it's top intelligence officials in Washington or the director of the National Security Agency at a programmers convention in Las Vegas, people are feeling the heat.
No, I'm saying I don't trust you.
You're lying to Congress. Why would we believe you're not lying to us right now?
He said he hasn't lied to Congress. Meantime, as the Senate Judiciary Committee held hearings, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a batch of classified documents on its domestic intelligence gathering operations, material that was not scheduled for declassification until the year 2038. They include a 2011 Justice Department briefing paper describing two now familiar NSA programs for logging phone and email data. It says, quote, only a tiny fraction of such records are ever viewed by NSA intelligence analysts. But the new information from Edward Snowden shows accessing such information is available to a very wide range of NSA analysts and is simple and easy to get. Detailed extensively in Britain's Guardian newspaper, the program is called X-Keyscore, and NSA analysts require no prior authorization from any court for using it to conduct searches on Americans. They only have to fill in a box stating there's some kind of foreign connection. In addition, the article details how X-Keyscore searches not just email subject lines and addresses, but also the body of the message itself. Also, social media activity and web browsing history. Now, the NSA maintains that access to X-Keyscore and other search tools is limited. Michigan Republican Congressman Justin Amash, a skeptic, he tried and nearly succeeded last week in passing legislation to rein in the NSA and is now backing a bipartisan effort to try again. Congressman, this program revealed in The Guardian today, X-Keyscore, how concerned should people be about it?
Very concerned. We're going to have a classified briefing tomorrow with Keith Alexander, and I intend to ask some questions. One of the things that we don't know is where is the content coming from? There's a whole array of content coming in, whether it be emails or other internet information, and I'd like to know, and my colleagues would like to know, where this data is coming from.
Did you know about this beforehand? Because, you know, what the people in the intelligence community always say is, well, look, there's congressional oversight, but my understanding is there's only congressional oversight about what the NSA happens to tell you about.
Yeah, we have these briefings, and is it possible that in some document somewhere, when they hand you 200 pages and tell you can only look at it in a room, that there's some line about this program? It's possible. I don't know. The problem we have when we go to these briefings is that we have to ask exactly the right question to get the right answer. If we don't ask the precise question, we don't get an answer.
Well, even when the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, testified on Capitol Hill recently, he was asked point blank by Ron Wyden whether or not they collect data on American citizens, and Clapper said no, not wittingly, and then he sort of later on said, well, the definition of collecting is different than the common definition. Does that, I mean, did he lie, in your opinion?
Well, yes, he did lie. He lied to Congress, he lied to the American people. I've called for him to step down, and I think he should face the same consequences that any American would face who came to Congress and gave false testimony or did so in a court proceeding. Any ordinary American might be facing prison time for doing that. So we have to be treating government officials the same way we treat anyone else.
We've had a number of intelligence officials over the last couple of months or weeks certainly saying, well, you know, some of these programs, these collecting of metadata, collecting of phone calls or phone numbers, it stopped dozens of terrorist attacks. Now Senator Patrick Leahy came forward and said, well, look, maybe it stopped or was involved in one, but when you actually start to look at the details of how these programs were used, it has not stopped nearly the number that some intelligence officials have been claiming.
Yeah, and they've been, there are many of them who have been very careful to say, under this program and other programs, we have stopped 54 terrorist attacks. There are some members of Congress who have not been very careful, and I think have bordered on giving false testimony to the American people, and we should take a close look at that. But yeah, I think those who are careful and cautious about what they say realize that it's not this particular collection of phone records, mass collection of phone records, that is doing the work here.
I spoke to Glenn Greenwald on this program last night. He pointed out that people within the government, you know, high-level officials, leak classified information all the time if it suits their political interests or you know, whatever interest they may have, and nothing seems to happen to them. And yet people with no status, no political connections like Bradley Manning or Edward Snowden or even lower level officials, they leak classified information and get hit with the full brunt of the U.S. justice system, particularly under the Obama administration. I'm certainly not condoning the breaking of any law, but is the system unfair here?
I think the system is unfair, and we need a better way for those who want to blow the whistle on the government to do so. There was a lot of talk that Edward Snowden could go to, for example, a member of Congress and tell them about the program, that it wasn't being applied in what he thought was a constitutional manner, and that's just not true. Edward Snowden couldn't come to me or most members of Congress and talk about it. He had to go to his superiors, and he might be able to talk to some people on the Intelligence Committee. So they don't have a lot of avenues. And if you look at some of the Intelligence Committee members, it's pretty stacked in favor of people who support these programs, with the exception of a few people like Senator Wyden and Senator Udall and some others.
Congressman Amash, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anderson.
Well, let's dig deeper now with Edward Snowden's father, Lon, also Lon Snowden's attorney, constitutional lawyer, and former Reagan Justice Department official, Bruce Fein. Good to have you both on the program. And again, Lon, what's your reaction to this newly published information from The Guardian based on intelligence your son gave them, that there's a program that essentially allows the NSA to access anything a typical user does on the Internet?
Well, I find it shocking. It's simply a matter of more truth coming forward. I've only been able to scan the new information, but I'm very interested in seeing the two intelligence committees now, specifically Mike Rogers, the chairman in the House, and Dianne Feinstein, what they're going to have to say. Is there going to be more misdirection? You know, we talk about James Clapper, but I think the leadership of the two intelligence committees at this point is quite suspect. And Congressman Amash, I believe, alluded to it when he talked about how people answer questions. Well, much of how you answer questions is framed by what questions are asked. So I would say that Mike Rogers, Dutch Ruppersberger, Peter King, Dianne Feinstein, and some of the ex officio members, to be quite honest, and those leaders who put them there, really need to take a hard look at that leadership. I believe it's deficient. In my prior career, when you have problems with oversight and there's a loss of confidence, you change the leadership. And I believe it's time for that.
I also would volunteer. It shows that sunshine is the best disinfectant. Exactly why Edward Snowden's revelations were so critical to the functioning of democracy. And one of the things that was very apparent when we attended the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing today, conducted by Senator Pat Leahy, that everyone was eager to discuss ways to reform and to curtail the programs that Edward Snowden revealed, but it was like his name was taboo. No one could utter Edward Snowden's name because he showed that they had been derelict in not disclosing and conducting the oversight that he did single-handedly, 29 years old.
You know, Lon, I think a lot of people don't realize you've actually had you talked about your prior career. You had a career in the Coast Guard, as I understand it. Do you believe, when you hear intelligence officials say that these programs, some of the programs that your son revealed, that they stopped dozens, more than 50, or were involved with the prevention of more than 50 terrorist attacks? Do you believe that?
No, I think you have to focus on the language. I believe, you know, anyone in government who's trying to preserve a program or gain support for a program, you're going to use the strongest possible language. And when we originally heard language from, I believe, General Alexander giving testimonies, he was questioned again by the House Intelligence Committee, the language they used was, quote, potential terrorist events, end quote. Now, that gets extrapolated in the media to it thwarted 50 terrorist attacks, but I would be very interested in seeing the actual number of prosecutions and more details on that. But the bottom line is, if you have to say 50 potential events, that's not very strong language. But certainly, again, I believe we need a strong intelligence community, and they do good work, and also a strong conventional defense. But it's a matter of priority, and I really believe that if we pull this thread, we're going to find there's a bigger issue here, and the issue is money and power. There are many corporations who benefit from these programs, as well as employees, I should say appointed officials within the intelligence community who bounce back and forth between government and corporate service. And it's a cash cow, to be quite frank. We have other, I believe, issues that politicians are ignoring because there's concern about votes. Again, I'll go back to the southern border. Certain politicians do not want to talk about security there. I would love to hear from some of our, particularly retired, who have no fear of blowback, retired Border Patrol officials talking about just how secure that southern border is.
If I could inject also, Anderson, one other deficiency in that number is it doesn't state that whatever was foiled couldn't have been foiled with measures consistent with the Patriot Act, Section 215, and the Fourth Amendment. Just to say that we foiled something doesn't mean that you had to go to that kind of dragnet surveillance in order to discover what needed to be discovered. In fact, the testimony today was there's only a tiny, tiny fraction out of really billions, if not trillions, of data gathered on Americans that ever is viewed as relevant. Then really, do you need to gather all that information? And they started to ask, well, maybe that's not what we need to do. We need to have a conversation. Of course, none of them said the reason why you're thinking about this is Edward Snowden.
Well, I want to ask you, Lon, there are a couple things you said recently, I think, to the Washington Post. I just want to try to get some more clarification on. You said that the FBI had asked you to travel to Moscow to see your son a while back. What did they expect you to do or hope you to do? And is that something you would still like to do at some point, go there?
I'm glad you asked that. I can't give you a date. It was some time ago. And they called and they asked if I would be willing to get on a flight and go to Moscow to see my son. And I was at home, and it was a complete surprise. I had no attorney at the time. I'd done nothing wrong, and I was adamant that I would not have an attorney. And I thought about it, and I wanted to say yes. And then I asked, are you sure my son is in Moscow? And they said, well, no. And I said, well, wait, I'm not going to get on a flight and go to Moscow and sit on the tarmac to be an emotional tool for you to use against him. I want to first be able to speak to my son, so can you establish communications? And initially they told me, they said, well, I'm not sure I can. And I thought, you know, I have buddies who could set up communications at any place on the planet, you know, and all of the military services within a very short period of time. And so that was the prerequisite. I said, if you can set up communications and I can speak to my son, and I believe there's value, I would like to go. And the positive thing that came out of that is after I hung up, I thought, you know, maybe I should have legal counsel if I'm going to get on an airplane and possibly go to Moscow. That's what led me through a trusted advisor to Bruce Fine and other attorneys, and that was a critical milestone for me, and I'm thankful for that. We tried to work with the FBI to set up communications. One of our requirements was going to be that attorney-client privilege was respected. I wanted to establish that for my son if he was going to be coming back to U.S. soil, and that's on the advice of Bruce, which was wise counsel that I wouldn't have considered. But from there, I don't want to get into specifics, but it just went downhill. At this point, I have no desire to get on an aircraft with the FBI to fly to Moscow because I have lost faith in the overarching organization, the Justice Department, that, again, they are operating in good faith.
And you would actually tell your son, I mean, my understanding from you, what you said last week on this program, you would actually tell your son it's probably a good idea to stay in Russia, you would say. Is that true?
No question. That's, again, you know, it's an evolution for me of watching, again, so many congressmen, again, these folks on the intel committees, what I've seen from them and other comments from, again, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State at this point, absolutely, I feel that it's in my son's best interest, both for his personal safety and finding justice, and which I hope he will be able to return to the United States and answer for this and the truth be told. In this climate, I don't believe that's possible. So, yes, I think Russia is the best place for him. I think that's where Russia, I believe, has a strength and conviction to protect my son at this point.
I want to, actually, Bruce, before you jump in, because I know you're about to jump in, but I just want to ask one other question that I want you both to respond to. Since last we talked, Bradley Manning was convicted of leaking classified material, though he was acquitted of the most serious charge of aiding the enemy. Still, he's facing maximum 136 years in prison. Lon, starting with you, does that give you pause just in terms of what it could mean for your son?
Certainly, it has implications, but Bradley Manning was really a member of the military, as I was for most of my life, subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, tried in a military court, but certainly I know how he was treated, and ultimately it's the government at the highest levels that was responsible for that. So at this point, I'm really concerned about my son's safety. I'm not even thinking about what would happen in terms of the trial. That's why we have attorneys, Bruce, and access to many others, and we're just not at that point now. Okay. I'm concerned about my son's immediate safety, security, and health.
Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you can distinguish Edward Snowden's case from Bradley Manning's with regard to the substance of what he disclosed. It would be a violation of the First Amendment, in my view, for the government to punish the disclosure of wrongful government action. We have a right to petition for redress of grievances under the First Amendment. I did want to volunteer that last evening I did have an opportunity to speak with Anatoly Kuchera, which is Edward Snowden's attorney in Russia.
Yeah.
And we had a pleasant conversation. He did reassure me that Edward is in good health, and there may be a time where it would be constructive to try to meet and see whether there can't be common ground that everyone agrees would advance the interests of the United States, Mr. Snowden, Lon, his father, and the interests of Russia in trying to resolve this in a way that honors due process and the highest principles of fairness and civilization.
Bruce, fine, good to have you on. Lon Snowden as well. Thank you very much. For more on the story, obviously, you can go to CNN.